Her ungrateful children kicked their elderly mother out into the night, thinking she would never get back up, but they were dead wrong. A secret from their deceased father's will was about to make them lose everything. And the one who would make them kneel in regret was none other than the very mother they had callously thrown away. What a joy to have you here. Tell me where you are watching us from now. Leave a comment and let us know. Josephine woke up that morning with a light heart and a smile that lit up her face, just like every time her children came to visit her. She had spent almost a week baking chocolate chip cookies, tidying up the living room, and preparing the old drip coffee pot that she loved to use when they were little. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and vanilla, and the table was set with the china cups she saved for special occasions. As she stirred the coffee with a wooden spoon, she couldn't stop thinking about how hard it was to raise them alone after her husband passed away, about the years of sacrifice and sleepless nights, the nights spent awake tending to fevers, and the days spent working, folding other people's laundry to pay for their school. Now that the three of them were adults, she felt grateful to have them nearby, even if it was only from time to time. The house was usually filled with their laughter, or at least she thought so, until she noticed that today the smiles were forced and their glances crossed in silence, as if they were hiding something she couldn't see. Stephen, the eldest at 47, was a burly man whose brow was almost always furrowed. As a child, he had been protective, but life and debts had hardened him. Josephine offered him coffee with tenderness, saying he looked tired and was surely working too much. He accepted the cup, but barely held it in his hands, not taking a single sip. Kimberly, 45, with her elegant white blouse and perfectly pinned-up hair, sat very straight on the sofa, as if trying to keep the dust of the old living room from touching her clothes. She smiled without showing her teeth when her mother served her a slice of cake, saying she would eat later because she was on a diet. Adam, the youngest at 42, remained standing by the window, looking out at the yard, his hands in his pockets and his shoulders slumped. He sometimes seemed the most sensitive of the three, but at that moment he didn't dare meet his mother's gaze. As Josephine placed the last tray of cookies on the table and sat down with a sigh of satisfaction, Stephen interrupted her with a voice harsher than she remembered. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, and the silence that followed was so heavy that even the ticking of the old wall clock seemed to stop. Josephine looked at him, confused, trying to read in his eyes the reason for this sudden seriousness. "Of course, son. Tell me what's wrong," she replied in a thin voice, although inside, a pang of anxiety was beginning to grow. Kimberly leaned forward, took her mother's wrinkled hand with surprising coldness, and said in a tone that tried to be sweet but sounded like a sentence, "You can't stay here anymore, Mom. It's too much for you. This house is too big, and we think it's best if you find another place to stay." Josephine felt an icy chill run down her spine. For a moment, she thought she hadn't understood correctly and blinked hard, hoping the sentence would vanish. "Another place?" she asked in disbelief, as if those words couldn't possibly come from her own children's mouths. Kimberly pulled her hand back and looked down, pretending to check her phone. Stephen pressed his lips together and said they had already discussed it among the three of them, and it wasn't fair for her to keep occupying such a large house when they also had their own families and needs. Adam, still not looking at her, murmured almost in a whisper, "It's for the best, Mom." Josephine's heart beat so fast she felt the air escaping her lungs. "Are you kicking me out of my own home?" she asked, her voice breaking and her eyes filling with tears that fought not to fall. Stephen stood up abruptly and said not to see it that way, that it wasn't abandonment, but a practical decision, and that they could help her find an assisted living facility where she would be well cared for. Kimberly nodded, saying she even knew a nice place with gardens and nurses where she could make friends her own age. Adam put his hand on the back of his neck and said nothing, but his uncomfortable gesture was as eloquent as any word. Josephine felt the floor open up beneath her. She remembered the birthdays celebrated in that house, the walls that still held the crayon marks where her children had learned to write their names. Every corner was filled with memories. The armchair she embroidered while waiting for them to come home from school, the kitchen where she spent hours preparing their favorite meals, the bedroom that still smelled like childhood, even though it now only held old furniture and clothes stored in bags. And now her own children were telling her she had to leave, that there was no longer room for her in what was once her home. She tried to argue, saying she didn't need much, that she could live in the smallest room, that she wouldn't even ask them for help, just a corner so she wouldn't feel alone. But Stephen interrupted her with a firm voice. "Mom, it's not safe for you, and it's not practical for us either. We need space and peace of mind." Kimberly added that they didn't want the day to come when she fell in the empty house and no one could help her. Adam remained silent, clenching his fists until his knuckles turned white. Tears began to roll down Josephine's cheeks, and she couldn't stop them. She felt a lump in her throat so large she could barely speak. She looked up at her children, searching for a glimpse of compassion, a sign that this was all a misunderstanding, but she only found impatience and distance in their faces. In that moment, she understood that they had already made the decision long before telling her, and that nothing she said could make them change their minds. She got up shakily from her chair and murmured in a thin voice, "Then, I suppose I'll have to pack." Kimberly breathed a sigh of relief and said they had prepared a small suitcase with her essentials so she wouldn't have to worry about anything. Stephen added that a cab would pick her up in an hour to take her to the facility they had chosen. Adam finally looked up, and his eyes met his mother's for a brief instant, filled with guilt and sadness, but he said nothing. Josephine felt her heart break into 1,000 pieces, seeing that the boy who once cried in her arms now had no words for her. As she slowly climbed the stairs to say goodbye to her room, each step felt heavy, as if she were carrying the world on her shoulders. In her mind echoed the words her husband once told her before he died, "Take care of them, Joe, as I would take care of you." And now, those same children were leaving her homeless, without family, without a place to feel safe. Entering the room, she paused for a moment and stroked the blanket she had knitted with her own hands, inhaling the scent of lavender that still lingered in the air. She sat on the edge of the bed and whispered to herself, "How did my own children come to hate me?" The sound of a car stopping in front of the house pulled her from her thoughts. Kimberly called to her from downstairs, "The cab is here." Josephine picked up the small suitcase, which barely weighed anything but felt like a tombstone, and went down the stairs with the dignity she had left. As she walked through the door, the cold night air enveloped her, and a light drizzle began to fall on her gray hair. No one walked her to the car. She only heard the door close behind her, a dry sound that chilled her soul. To be thrown out by your own children, it's just unthinkable. That cold sound of the door closing wasn't just the end of her life in that house, it was the beginning of their downfall. Stay with us to see what happens to Josephine alone in the cold night. The cab drove through the dark streets, eventually stopping in front of a large, dark building near the edge of town. "This is the place," the driver said gruffly. Josephine looked out and saw a sign, "Willow Creek Assisted Living." But the gates were locked and the reception lights were off. They said someone would be waiting," she stammered. The driver sighed, annoyed. "My job is to drop you off at the address, ma'am. It's 9 p.m., visiting hours are over. I'm not waiting." Before she could protest, he had unloaded her small bag onto the wet sidewalk, collected his fare, and driven away, the cab's taillights disappearing into the rain. Left alone on the curb, Josephine stood for a moment, the small bag clutched tightly to her chest. She then began to walk slowly, her muffled footsteps echoing on the damp sidewalk stones, while the fine rain soaked her to the bone, and every drop that slid down her face mixed with the tears she couldn't stop. She felt the cold seep into her body, settling in her trembling hands and numb feet. But what hurt most wasn't the dampness or the icy wind, but the invisible weight pressing on her heart with every memory of the house she had just left behind. That house where she had seen Stephen take his first steps, where Kimberly learned to braid her rag doll's hair, and where Adam used to cry at night, begging her not to turn off the light. Now it was a place where she was no longer welcome, a space her children considered too large for her, but too useful for them. As she walked on without a clear destination, the street stretched out like an endless tunnel of shadows and yellow streetlights that barely managed to illuminate the persistent drizzle. Cars passed by, splashing small waves of dirty water onto her worn shoes, and a pair of stray dogs followed her at a distance, curiously sniffing the bag she carried. A young couple walked past in the opposite direction with open umbrellas and a hurried pace. The man muttered indiscreetly, "Poor lady, Bet nobody loves her, while the woman looked at him with a pitying glance, barely disguised as discomfort. Josephine heard every word like a dull blow to the stomach and clutched the bag tighter to her chest, feeling how the clothes inside couldn't give her even half the warmth she needed. She didn't raise her head. She didn't want to see the stranger's looks, loaded with judgment or indifference. She just kept walking, her gaze fixed on her wet shoes and the raindrops forming tiny rivers in the pavement cracks. She remembered the times she herself had watched old women walking alone in the rain from her living room window, wondering if they had families, if anyone was waiting for them at home, never imagining that one day she would be the one sparking that question in others. She finally reached the small town square, a place that in other times was synonymous with afternoons spent with her children playing on the swings, while she sat knitting on a bench with her shawl over her shoulders. Now the square was empty, deserted under the gray sky, and the wind moved the fallen leaves piled in the corners. Josephine approached one of the cold iron benches and sat down carefully, shivering as her bones protested the contact with the wet metal. She wrapped the shawl, which barely managed to cover her shoulders, around herself, trying to retain a little of her body heat. She felt the cold wasn't just coming from outside, but also from within, from a corner of her soul where a sadness so deep had settled that it threatened to devour her whole. She looked around, perhaps hoping to see a familiar face, a friendly hand reaching out to her, but she only found the indifference of the closed-up houses and the distant echo of the rain hitting the rooftops. As the town clock struck 8 with its metallic chime, Josephine whispered to herself in a broken voice, "How did it come to this?" And as she spoke those words, she felt something inside her tear apart. She remembered the night Stephen came home late from work, and she would get up to heat his dinner, even though she was already exhausted. The times Kimberly cried over a broken heart, and she comforted her, promising the pain would pass, and the days Adam was sick with fever, and she spent hours by his side, holding his hand while he slept. How was it possible that those she gave everything to, for whom she sacrificed her dreams, her years, and even her health, now saw her as a burden, as an obstacle to be discarded with the same coldness one discards old furniture that no longer fits in the house? The cold intensified. Josephine's hands trembled uncontrollably as she tried to warm them by rubbing them together, but not even the friction could bring back any feeling. Her vision blurred, not just from tears, but from accumulated exhaustion, from the hunger that was starting to knot in her stomach, and from the uncertainty of not knowing where to go now. She thought about finding a covered place, some doorway where she could take shelter for the night, but inside her, the absurd hope still flickered that her children would change their minds and call her, asking her to come back, that it had all been a mistake, a confusion, a nightmare that would end upon waking. But the phone, in her purse, remained silent. No messages, no calls, just the insistent sound of the rain and the whisper of the wind that seemed to mock her misfortune. She settled on the bench, trying to find a position that would let her rest without getting too cold. But the cold was relentless, seeping into her bones as a reminder that she no longer belonged anywhere. The streetlights flickered, casting long, ghostly shadows of memories on the wet ground. Josephine closed her eyes for a moment and let herself be carried away by the pain, letting the tears flow freely as one question repeated over and over in her mind. Where did I go wrong? Without finding an answer to soothe the open wound in her heart. Josephine remained seated on that icy town square bench, her fingers wrinkled from the cold and damp, her gaze lost somewhere between the flickering streetlights and the shadows stretching like ghosts on the wet ground. The fine rain continued to fall, soaking her clothes until they clung stickily to her skin. And although she tried to hug herself to retain some warmth, she felt herself growing smaller and smaller, as if the world around her was expanding in its indifference. She closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. The cold air burned her lungs and made her cough, a hollow sound that echoed in the empty square. As she clutched the small bag containing the only thing she had left in the world, she repeated to herself once more that her children wouldn't come, that she wouldn't get a call telling her it was all a mistake, that the door was open and she could come home. In that instant, her lips barely moved, and she whispered, "They threw me out like a dog," and hearing her own trembling voice, she felt a lump in her throat cut off her breath. The tears welled up again, mixing with the rain, and she gave way to a muffled sob that shook her fragile body. She didn't notice the sound of footsteps until a deep, trembling, but astonished voice broke the silence of the square, saying, "Is that you? I can't believe it." And opening her eyes with a start, she saw a tall man standing before her, his posture weary but firm, with a cane in his right hand and a hat that barely managed to shield his gray hair from the rain. His deep, dark eyes lit up with a flash of recognition and tenderness that Josephine hadn't seen in years. "Mr. Walter?" she managed to say. "You're Josephine, aren't you?" he said. "It's me, Walter Ramirez. I can't believe I'm finding you here after all this time. What happened to you? Why are you alone on such a cruel night?" Josephine blinked, confused, trying to recognize the face marked by wrinkles, but the eyes were still the same as the boy who, years ago, used to look at her shyly at the town festivals. The same young man who gave her a red carnation at the fair when they were almost children and who one day left without saying goodbye to seek his fortune in the city. She barely managed to murmur, "Walter? Is it really you? It can't be." And she covered her face with her hands, ashamed that he would see her in this state, wet, trembling, and broken inside. He approached slowly, leaning on his cane, and without a moment's hesitation, he took off the heavy coat he was wearing and placed it over Josephine's shoulders, saying, "Let's go. You can't stay here." Finally, a moment of kindness. An old friend, Walter, appearing almost like a miracle in the rain. This single act of warmth is about to change everything for Josephine. Keep listening, because what Walter reveals next will unravel this whole story. The night is too cold, and I won't let you stay like this. Come with me, please. Don't be afraid. She wanted to protest, to say she didn't want to be a burden, but the words got stuck in her throat, and she only managed to sob as she felt the warmth of the coat and Walter's voice begin to bring her back to life. He leaned down to look her in the eyes and said with unexpected sweetness, "Let's go, Jo. You don't deserve to be here alone. No one should be, especially not you, who were always so good to everyone." Josephine finally gave in, and as tears rolled down her cheeks, she leaned into him, letting herself be held like a wounded child who has finally found the safe arms she longed for. Between sobs, she confessed, "They threw me out like a dog, Walter. My own children. They kicked me out of the house we built with so much effort, with the sweat and tears of a lifetime. They left me on the street as if I were nothing. And now I don't know where to go or what to do." Walter held her tightly, feeling her thin body tremble beneath the soaked coat, and whispered with a mixture of pain and restrained anger, "You don't deserve this, Jo. You don't deserve them doing this to you. But you're not alone anymore. I'm here for you, and I won't let you spend another night like this." Carefully, Walter helped her up, and together they walked slowly through the unceasing rain, he supporting each step with his cane and she clinging to his arm, as if her life depended on not collapsing. The walk was silent, save for the sound of their shoes splashing in the puddles and the whisper of the wind through the trees. Josephine could hardly believe that after so many years, fate would reunite her with Walter at such a dark moment in her life. When they reached a small pickup truck parked on the corner, he opened the door and helped her in, making sure she was comfortable before getting behind the wheel. During the drive, she remained silent, watching the streetlights slide by like fireflies on the window, while her mind wavered between exhaustion and disbelief. After about a half-hour drive on narrow, winding roads, they arrived at a modest cabin tucked away deep in the wooded hills, with a shingled roof and a small chimney from which a thread of smoke rose, perfuming the air with the smell of firewood. Walter helped her out and led her to the door, saying, "It's humble here, but it's warm and safe for you. It's not the mansion you deserve, but at least here, no one will kick you out." Upon entering, the cabin was lit with the soft glow of warm lamplight, and the aroma of freshly baked bread filled the air. There was simple but clean furniture, wool blankets folded on the sofa, and a small kitchen with steaming pots that promised warmth and comfort. Josephine felt the heat of the fireplace caress her face and couldn't stop the tears from flowing again, this time not from sadness, but from a relief so profound it shook her soul. Walter guided her to a chair by the fire and said, "Sit here, Jo. Get warm. I'll make us something to eat. You must be exhausted and hungry." She looked at him with eyes shining through her tears and barely managed to reply, "Thank you, Walter. I don't know how to thank you for this. After all these years. And now you appear like an angel in the middle of my darkest night." He smiled sadly and replied, "Maybe life was saving this moment for me, to give you back even a small part of all the good you've always given. Because, Josephine, you always gave without asking for anything in return, and that's something one never forgets." As she let herself be enveloped by the warmth of the fire and the aroma of hot stew that began to fill the cabin, she felt that for the first time in a long time, her heart was loosening, and hope was timidly emerging amidst her pain, like a green sprout in barren land. The next morning, the dawn light filtered shyly through the cabin's thick fabric curtains, and a soft aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, while the fireplace still crackled, having burned since the night before. Josephine opened her eyes slowly, still feeling her body heavy and sore, as if the cold and sadness of the previous night had left invisible scars on her skin and in her heart. She sat up on the sofa, Walter's wool blanket slipping from her shoulders, and looked around as if needing to confirm that this warm, quiet place was real and not a dream. Walter's modest home, with its worn wooden furniture, shelves full of old books, and black and white photographs from another time, radiated a peace so deep that for an instant it managed to quiet the whirlwind of thoughts that hadn't given her a moment's rest since last night. She remembered her children's faces when they sat her down in the living room to tell her she had to leave the house, and a lump formed in her throat. The wound was still as open as when the door closed behind her, but now there was a slight warmth in her chest, an unexpected comfort at the thought of Walter's presence. The sound of dishes clinking softly in the kitchen brought her back to the present. Walter was standing, leaning on his cane, pouring coffee into 2 earthenware mugs with a concentrated and serene expression that contrasted with the storm still raging inside Josephine. He turned upon noticing she was awake and smiled warmly. "Good morning, Joe. I hope you got some rest. You are safe here. I want you to know that." She tried to smile back, but her lips barely curved. The weight of gratitude and shame kept her silent as she sat up completely. Walter approached slowly and handed her the cup of coffee. "Drink this, Joe. It'll do you good." He sat across from her, his expression serious. "Josephine," he said gently, "when you told me last night that they kicked you out of the house your husband built, did he ever mention a lawyer? An old friend named Martin?" Josephine frowned, thinking back. "Martin? Yes, Martin Reeves. My husband trusted him." "Why?" Walter leaned forward. "Martin is an old friend of mine, too. I called him this morning, very early. I told him what happened." Walter paused, taking a breath. "Joe, Martin says your husband filed a final will with him, just before he passed. A will that he never told the children about." Josephine's eyes widened, her hands gripping the mug. "What? What did it say?" "He's on his way here now," Walter said, his voice firm. "He's bringing the papers. Your husband wasn't a fool, Joe. It seems he wanted to protect you." Josephine's eyes widened in disbelief, and a wave of conflicting emotions washed over her, a mixture of surprise, anger, and a ray of hope, so unexpected it made her tremble even more. She reached her hands toward the envelope but immediately pulled them back, as if afraid to touch an object so laden with meaning and memories. Walter encouraged her gently. "Open it, Joe. It's your right to know. You have to see it with your own eyes." Josephine took a deep breath, set the mug down on the table with shaky hands, and took the envelope with her fingertips, like someone holding something fragile that could dissolve with a sigh. She broke the seal with a hesitant gesture and unfolded the papers inside, her eyes filling with tears that threatened to blur the words written in ink already faded by the years. She read slowly, her lips whispering the text almost as if repeating a prayer. And when she reached the line stating that the property was left solely in the name of Josephine Miller, she let out a choked whisper. It's in my name. He left it only to me." And her hands began to shake so hard the papers nearly fell to the floor. Walter leaned forward to steady them and said firmly, "Yes, Joe, it's you. And that house is legally yours. Your children never knew, because your husband probably never mentioned it. But here is the proof. And you're still in time to reclaim what belongs to you. Josephine's mind was a whirlwind of jumbled memories and thoughts. She imagined her husband signing that will in silence, perhaps thinking of protecting her from an uncertain future. She saw him with his firm handwriting and serious expression, and for an instant she felt he was there with her, giving her the strength she needed. Tears began to roll down her cheeks, and she could barely say, "I can't believe it, Walter. All my life, I thought the house was theirs, my children's, because their father built it for us. But now it turns out it was mine. And they kicked me out as if I was worthless." Walter took her hands firmly and looked her in the eyes. "No, Joe, they didn't kick you out of their house. They kicked you out of your house, and you can't let them keep what is yours. We're going to do this right, and fast." Without wasting time, Walter picked up his old-fashioned phone from the table and dialed a number he seemed to know by heart. He waited a few seconds until a deep, tired voice answered on the other end. Walter said urgently, "Martin, I need your help. I have Josephine Miller here, and there's a will we need to register immediately. Can you come to the cabin, or should we go to your office?" The lawyer's voice responded with words Josephine couldn't quite understand, but she could see Walter nodding and replying, "Perfect. We'll wait for you here then." "Thank you, old friend. This is a delicate matter, and we need it to be quick." Josephine put her hands to her face, trying to contain the avalanche of emotions hitting her like waves against rocks. She couldn't believe that after everything she had suffered, life was offering her a chance at justice, a chance to reclaim not only her house but also her dignity. Walter placed a hand on her shoulder and said warmly, "Trust me, Joe, we'll get this resolved, and I won't let them take what's yours. This time, you will have the last word." Hours later, when Martin the lawyer arrived at the cabin with a worn leather briefcase and a serious but kind expression, he reviewed the documents carefully. After a few minutes of silence, he declared in a firm voice, "Legally, the property is yours, Mrs. Miller. No one can dispute it. The will is valid, registered, and signed right here. Your husband made sure it was clear." Your husband made sure it was clear. Josephine felt the air return to her lungs for the first time in days, and although the tears continued to fall, this time they were tears of relief, of a new strength blooming deep within her, as her lips moved in a barely audible whisper, "Thank you. Thank you both. Maybe my husband is still watching over me from wherever he is." Walter squeezed her hand and replied, "Of course he is, Joe. He protected you until the end. And now it's time for you to protect yourself, because you deserve more than this. Much more." The morning was unusually warm in the city, but in the family home, the atmosphere felt dense, almost suffocating, as if the walls themselves knew what was about to happen. Stephen was in the dining room, his shirt sleeves rolled up and his tie loosened. The dark circles under his eyes revealed nights of worry and stress accumulated from the debts that were suffocating him. Kimberly, sitting in an elegant velvet armchair she had brought from her own apartment to give the old living room a modern touch, held her phone. Her perfectly manicured fingers trembled slightly as she tried to maintain her composure. Adam leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the floor as if afraid to look up and face what they all sensed was about to explode. The silence was broken by the sharp sound of the front door opening. A middle-aged man in a dark suit, carrying a leather briefcase, entered with a firm step and a neutral expression. Without even saying hello, he handed a sealed envelope to Stephen. "I have an urgent notification for the occupants of this property." Stephen took the envelope, confused. "What is this?" he asked. But the man just replied, "Everything is detailed in the document," and left as quickly as he arrived, leaving a tense silence in his wake. Stephen broke the seal with trembling hands. His eyes darted quickly from line to line, the color draining from his face. Suddenly, he dropped the paper on the table with a gesture of disbelief and fury, and slammed his fist on the wooden surface so hard the cups rattled, making a faint, clinking sound. "What do you mean the house isn't ours anymore?" he yelled. "This has to be a mistake. Someone is messing with us." Seeing the frightened looks on Kimberly and Adam, he added, "This can't be legal. This house was Dad's. We always knew that. He built it with his own hands, and I won't let them kick us out like we're intruders." Kimberly picked up the document with delicate hands and began to read it aloud. Her voice trembled as the words sank in. and reality hit them with the brutality of an earthquake. You have 15 days to vacate the property due to a legal sale to a third party. For any claims, you must contact the office of the signing attorney. Her breathing became ragged, and tears began to fill her eyes until she finally broke down in a sob. She left us with nothing. Her own children. How could she do this to us, Mom? How could she betray us like this after everything we did for her? Adam, who had been silent until then, pushed himself away from the doorframe and began pacing the living room, his hands on his head. He muttered, almost to himself, "This doesn't make sense. Mom would never do something like this. There must be a mistake. She wouldn't leave us on the street without telling us. We have to call her right now and clear this up." He pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed Josephine's number with slightly shaking hands. The ringing tone echoed in the room like an unsettling echo. 1, 2, 3 times until the call went to voicemail. He tried again, this time with a tone of desperation in his voice. "Answer, Mom, please. We need to talk to you. This can't be true. Answer. I just want to understand." But again, the call went unanswered. The silence on the other end of the line became a cold wall, separating him from his mother more than any physical distance. Stephen began pacing the room like a caged animal. His steps echoed on the worn wooden floor as he clenched his fists. "We can't let this happen. No way. We're going to talk to that lawyer and demand an explanation. This is an injustice. She has no right to do this to us, after everything we sacrificed." Kimberly, her makeup ruined by tears, slumped onto the sofa and covered her face with her hands. "We sacrificed our lives taking care of her, and now she repays us like this, taking away the only thing Dad left us." Adam stopped in front of them and shouted, "Stop it! Maybe we were the ones who left her alone. Maybe we never wanted to see her as a burden, but we treated her like one. Maybe this is what we deserve." The room fell silent for an instant. Adam's words hung in the air like a painful truth no one dared to face. Meanwhile, outside, the rain began to beat against the window panes, as if the sky itself was crying for the family that was falling apart from the inside. Kimberly broke the silence in a thin voice. "Maybe we can still make her see reason. If we find her and apologize, maybe she'll give us the house back. We can't end up on the street with our families. We have nowhere else to go." Stephen nodded, his brow furrowed, but added, "We're not going to beg her. First, we'll talk to the lawyer, and then we'll see how to fix this once and for all." Adam dialed his mother's number again, but this time, there wasn't even a ring, just an automated message stating the phone was off or out of service range. The phone is off. The very mother they discarded is now unreachable right when they need her most. The panic setting in is real, as they're about to learn exactly what it feels like to be left with nothing. He slowly lowered his arm, the phone still in his hand, and his gaze drifted to the old family photograph hanging on the wall showing a young, smiling Josephine, surrounded by her 3 small children on a sunny day that seemed to belong to another life. The silence became unbearable, broken only by Kimberly's sobs and the relentless drumming of the rain. The 3 siblings, who until recently believed they owned the house, now felt like intruders in their own home. Every corner echoed with a mother's voice that was no longer there to comfort them or grant them the forgiveness they so desperately needed. Without realizing it, they were beginning to understand the magnitude of what they had lost. And it wasn't just a house. It was the years of love, the invisible sacrifices of a mother who had now decided to stand up and reclaim her place in the world, leaving them to face the harsh reality of their actions for the first time. The afternoon was tinted, an opaque gray, the kind that seems to promise a storm, even if the sky can't quite decide between sun and rain, and the air carried a smell of damp earth mixed with road dust. From a nearby hill, Josephine and Walter stood, almost motionless, hidden behind the protection of an old oak tree that spread its branches like long, silent arms. At their feet, the scene unfolding seemed like something from a strange dream or perhaps a nightmare for those living it. A large, white moving truck was parked in front of Josephine's old family home, and several uniformed men were coming and going, carrying furniture, boxes, mirrors wrapped in blankets. and paintings that once adorned the living room walls where she used to knit and tell her children stories when they were little. The front door of the house stood wide open, letting out a cold, tense air that mixed with the metallic sound of the dolly's wheels screeching over the porch tiles. Josephine kept her hands clasped over her abdomen, squeezing them with restrained force as her eyes followed the workers' every move without blinking. Her breathing was slow and deep, like someone striving to maintain control when emotions threatened to overflow. Walter, beside her, watched her out of the corner of his eye with a mixture of concern and admiration, knowing that the moment she had waited for with so much pain and patience had finally arrived. Down below, Kimberly stood in the middle of the yard, her hair disheveled and her face distorted by desperation. She wore an elegant outfit, though wrinkled from the turmoil of the last few days, and her heels sank into the damp grass as she gesticulated wildly, as if she could stop the course of events by sheer force of words. She yelled at the workers, her shrill voice laden with impotence. "You can't do this to us. This is our house. You have no right to touch anything here. You don't know who I am. And if you don't stop right now, I'll call the police to get you out of here." The men barely looked at her, accustomed to similar scenes, and continued their work in silence, carrying out a sofa that was once Kimberly's pride when she chose it to replace the old furniture from her childhood. Her younger brother, Adam, was near the door, holding a cardboard box with both hands, his eyes red and wet, as he muttered, almost strengthless, "I never thought Mom would do this to us. Not after everything we lived through together. Not after so many Christmases and birthdays under this roof." His words were lost in the noise of objects clattering and the truck's running engine, but they echoed in Josephine's heart like a belated pang of regret. Stephen was nowhere to be seen, though his silhouette could be glimpsed through the dining room window, pacing back and forth with his phone pressed to his ear, his forehead covered in sweat. He had spent the last few days trying to negotiate with lawyers, looking for loopholes, calling influential contacts, but it had all been in vain. The signed and registered document was clear. The house had been sold, and the new owners had every right to request they vacate. Now, from the window, Stephen looked out at the yard where he had learned to ride a bike, and for the first time in years, he felt a pang of emptiness in his chest, a sharp pain that wasn't due to material loss, but to the certainty of having betrayed the only person who was always there for them, asking for nothing in return. Kimberly screamed again as she ran after a worker, carrying a crystal lamp. "Leave that. That's mine. No one has the right to take it. You don't know how much it cost us to have this house, and now you want to throw us out on the street like we're strangers." Her voice broke at the end, and for the first time, she revealed a vulnerability she rarely allowed to surface. From the hill, Josephine watched everything in silence. Her lips barely moved as she whispered to Walter, her tone mixing sadness with an almost unsettling serenity. "I'm just giving back what they did to me. There's no revenge in this, no hatred, only justice." She isn't seeking revenge, she's simply watching justice take its course. It's heartbreaking to see a family destroyed by greed, but they made their choice. And Josephine, well, her new life is just beginning. Only justice. Walter looked at her with eyes full of tenderness and respect. His fingers brushed her hand in a supportive gesture, and he replied, "You've been stronger than anyone could be, Joe. And even though this hurts, it's not your fault. They chose their path." She nodded slowly. Her thoughts traveled back to the years when she devoted herself to making their breakfasts, washing their uniforms by hand, saving every last dollar so they would never lack anything. And she remembered the night those same children sat her down in the living room, and with cold words, asked her to leave because the house was too big for an old woman alone. The contrast between that moment and the current scene was so brutal that even the wind seemed to whisper a lesson about life's unexpected turns. The move continued. The furniture disappeared from the house, one piece after another, like leaves carried away by a current, and every object that left took with it a fragment of memories that now became loose pieces of a past her children would have to rebuild from scratch. Adam set the box down and sat on the edge of the porch, covering his face with his hands. His shoulders shook slightly as a silent sob escaped his throat. Kimberly knelt on the grass, exhausted and defeated, her hands still clutching the lamp, as if it were the last thing she could save from an inevitable shipwreck. Stephen finally came out of the house with heavy steps. His face was hardened by frustration, but his eyes shone with unshed tears. He looked up at the gray sky and muttered something that not even he fully understood, a mixture of anger, sadness, and remorse that burned his soul. Walter leaned toward Josephine and said softly, "It's time to go, Joe. You've seen what you needed to see. There's no need to stay here." She nodded with a long, deep sigh. The air she exhaled seemed to carry away a part of the weight she had carried in her chest for years. As they walked away down the hill path, the sound of the moving truck's engine began to fade in the distance. But the images of her children, facing the consequences of their own decisions, remained etched in Josephine's memory, a reminder that justice sometimes arrives quietly, without screams or confrontations, only with the resolve of a mother who finally decides to think of herself. The evening spread over the mountain like a golden blanket, slowly turning shades of pink and orange. The sky looked like a hand-painted picture, and the air carried a sweet aroma of damp earth and wildflowers. Walter's cabin, which until recently had been a solitary refuge for him and then a lifeline for Josephine, had now transformed into a corner full of life and hope. In the garden, a couple of roughly built wooden tables were adorned with hand-embroidered white tablecloths and small bouquets of flowers picked that morning from the nearby fields. A small group of friends, their faces wrinkled by time but lit by sincere smiles, helped place candles in glass jars and simple bows on the chairs, all with a humble warmth that made luxuries unnecessary. The murmur of their voices mixed with the distant song of birds and the whisper of the wind through the trees, creating a serene, almost magical atmosphere where every detail seemed to whisper that something new was beginning. Inside the cabin, Josephine looked at herself in an antique mirror that had belonged to Walter's mother, and for an instant, she barely recognized the woman looking back at her. Her hair, now styled in a low bun, was adorned with small white and violet wildflowers that a neighbor had lovingly brought over. She wore a simple white cotton dress, with soft lines and no showy adornments, but it fell over her body with unexpected grace. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the shawl covering her shoulders, not from cold, but because her heart was beating so hard she felt it might leap from her chest. Her lips curved into a trembling smile as she thought about everything that had happened to get to this moment, the tears shed, the cold nights when she believed her life was over. And now, instead, she was about to take a step she never imagined possible at her age. A soft knock on the door made her turn, and she saw Walter enter with an expression of restrained emotion. His eyes shone with an intensity that made Josephine feel a sweet warmth spreading through her entire being. Walter paused for a few seconds to gaze at her, as if wanting to burn that image into his memory forever. His voice broke slightly when he said, "You look beautiful, Joe. I never thought this day would come. And yet, here we are, like two young people about to start over." She smiled and lowered her gaze, a faint blush on her cheeks. "I never thought anyone would see me like this again," she replied, with eyes so full of love. "After everything I've been through, with you, I feel like life is giving me a miracle." He approached slowly, his steps measured as if each one were sacred, and took her hands in his, which still retained the strength of a man who had worked the land his whole life. In a low but firm voice, he confessed, "I've loved you in silence my whole life, Joe, ever since we were young and danced at the fairs, until life took us down different paths. But now I can tell you without fear and without regrets. I love you, and I want to make these years the best of our lives." Josephine felt tears welling up, not of sadness, but of a happiness so pure it almost hurt. She squeezed his hands. "I love you too, Walter. And if life gave me another chance, I want to take it with you, without looking back." When they walked out of the cabin together, the small group of friends was waiting in the garden, where the candles were beginning to be lit one by one, creating a warm glow that mixed with the twilight. The air was perfumed with the scent of wildflowers, and the wood burning slowly in a nearby fire pit. The guests, few but sincere, applauded with quiet joy when they appeared, and someone played soft chords on a guitar, which mingled with the chirping of the crickets. Josephine and Walter walked hand in hand toward a small, makeshift altar made of branches and white fabrics that swayed gently in the breeze. There, an old friend of Walter's, who had agreed to officiate the ceremony, waited for them with a wide smile and eyes moist with emotion. As they walked, Josephine felt that each step freed her from the chains of the past, from the cold nights on a town square bench, from the echo of her children's hurtful words, from the sadness she once thought was eternal. Now she was filled with hope, with the certainty that it was possible to love and be loved again, that life always saves one last gift for hearts that don't give up. Walter held her gaze with such a warm intensity that it made everything around them disappear. Only the two of them existed, and the silent promise to care for each other until their last day. The friend officiating spoke with a firm but loving voice. Life is a journey of meetings and partings, but today we celebrate a reunion that defies time and reminds us that it is never too late to begin again. The guests listened in silence, some discreetly drying their tears. And when the time came to exchange vows, Walter took Josephine's hands and said, his voice choked with emotion, "I promise to love you every day I have left on this earth, to care for you as I always should have, and to make you feel that by my side, you will always be home." She replied, tears rolling down her cheeks, "I promise to love you with all my soul and to walk with you in this new chapter, grateful that life has given me a new dawn by your side." The sun was setting slowly behind the mountains, and a golden glow bathed the newlyweds' faces as gentle applause erupted from the guests. The sound of birds returning to their nests and the crackling of the fire provided the perfect backdrop for Josephine and Walter's first kiss as husband and wife. A tender kiss full of promises that sealed not just a commitment, but the rebirth of two souls who had found each other when they least expected it. That night, amidst laughter, simple songs, and the warmth of the fire, the small wedding in the hills became an unforgettable memory, not just for them, but for all present, who witnessed that true love knows no age or final endings, only new beginnings. The sound of waves breaking gently on the shore could be heard from the open window of the new house that Josephine and Walter had turned into their refuge, a coastal home with white walls and a reddish roof, surrounded by a lush garden where wisteria climbed vigorously over the fences, filling the air with a sweet, penetrating aroma. The morning sun filtered through the branches, drawing dancing shadows on the stone floor, and the song of seabirds mixed with the salty breeze blowing in through the light curtains. Josephine moved calmly in the kitchen, a simple apron tied at her waist and her hair pulled back practically, while her experienced hands delicately kneaded the dough for homemade bread, which was already beginning to perfume the room. Every movement she made was filled with a new serenity, as if she had finally shed the invisible weight that had accompanied her for years. And as she added a pinch of salt and turned her head toward the window to look at Walter on the terrace, her lips curved into a smile so soft it seemed drawn by the sun itself outside. Walter was sitting in a wooden rocking chair, wearing a wide-brimmed hat to protect him from the sun and holding an open book, which he read with the concentration of someone who has learned to savor every page as a gift. Every so often, he would look up to gaze at the garden, the vivid colors of the flowers, the small birds fluttering about looking for breadcrumbs, and above all, to watch Josephine's figure moving gracefully in the kitchen out of the corner of his eye. There was a mixture of peace and gratitude in his eyes, a quiet certainty that life had given him a second act when he no longer expected one. When he caught the scent of the bread beginning to bake, he leaned toward the window and said warmly, "I can't believe how lucky I am to wake up every day to this smell, and to see you so full of life. Joe, you've turned this house into a true home," she replied without taking her eyes off the dough. "And you've given me back the feeling of being loved, a feeling needed after so much time. Only now do I understand what it means to live in peace." Hours later, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold, Josephine and Walter decided to take a walk down to the beach. The sand was warm under their bare feet, and each step left a deep footprint that would soon be caressed by the sea foam. They walked in silence, side by side, hands intertwined, their hearts beating to the same rhythm, as if the mere presence of the other was enough to fill them with a serene joy that no words could fully describe. The water lapped at their ankles in gentle waves that seemed to play with them, and the wind tousled their hair, while gulls glided in circles overhead, letting out their sharp cries. Walter gently squeezed Josephine's hand and looked at her with eyes full of tenderness, I never imagined that at our age, love could feel so new, so clean. Like the first time I saw you in the town square, all those decades ago." Josephine stopped for a moment, turned toward the sea, and let the breeze caress her face. Her eyes shone with tears that weren't of sadness, but of a joy so profound it almost felt sacred. Her voice trembling but firm, she said, "I've never been this happy, Walter. Not even in the years when my children were little and I believed home was a house full of laughter. Now I understand that true home is where there is peace, respect, and love. And you have given me all of that." He smiled with the calm that only men who have made peace with their past possess. "And you," he replied, "have taught me that it's never too late to start over, to love without fear, and to find a reason to keep going. Every day." They continued walking until the sun disappeared completely, and the sky filled with stars that reflected on the water like thousands of dancing lights. They returned to the house hand in hand, and as they climbed the small, grassy hill, Josephine felt that each step took her further from that past of abandonment and loneliness, and closer to a new life woven from simple but powerful gestures. Shared breakfasts, books read aloud, afternoons in the garden, and barefoot walks on the sand. In that instant, she understood that although the wounds of the past never completely disappear, love has the power to turn them into scars that no longer hurt, but rather remind her that it was necessary to go through the darkness to value the light she finally found. The afternoon light fell on the coast with a golden hue that slid over the calm waves, and the distant call of gulls announced the end of a serene day. But on the dirt road leading to the small house with white walls and a wisteria garden, a car was approaching, kicking up dust and leaving a trail of unease in the air. Josephine saw it from the window while peeling some apples in the kitchen. Her hands, still soft despite the years, froze in midair, and her eyes narrowed, trying to make out the figures inside the vehicle. Walter, sitting on the terrace with an open book, looked up and followed her gaze. His expression changed to a mixture of concern and understanding as he saw the car stop in front of the wooden gate. 3 figures got out, moving with a heavy slowness, as if each step cost them the strength of 1,000 confessions. Stephen was the first to open the door, his shoulders slumped and his face hardened by remorse. His wrinkled shirt and deep dark circles made him look much older than his years. Kimberly got out next, her hair carelessly tied back, her makeup smudged, and her hands clasped to her chest, as if afraid her heart might escape her body. Adam was the last to exit. He walked with his gaze fixed on the ground, his lips pressed into a trembling line. His fingers laced together nervously as he followed his siblings, not daring to look up. The 3 of them advanced to the small wooden gate, where they stopped, hesitating. The silence was so thick that only the murmur of the sea and the crunching of leaves under their shoes could be heard. Josephine came out of the house slowly. She stopped on the threshold, her apron still on, a dish towel in her hand. Her upright figure radiated a serenity that contrasted with the internal tremor shaking her. She watched them with eyes full of a mixture of love and distance, these children she had carried in her womb and raised with devotion, who now looked small and lost, like when they were children lost in the dark, searching for their mother's hand. Stephen took a step forward and, in an unexpected move, fell to his knees on the damp earth, his eyes full of tears, his voice breaking as he said, "Mom, we were so ungrateful. We never saw your sacrifice. We never understood your pain until we felt it ourselves. Please, forgive us. We didn't know how to take care of you when you needed us most." Kimberly, who until then had maintained some composure, also collapsed to the ground, hugging her knees with a muffled sob. "We can't live without you, Mom," she cried. "The house wasn't the home. You were the home. And now, everything feels empty. Without your laugh, without your scent, without your hands taking care of us, even though we were adults." Adam approached his siblings with hesitant steps and finally raised his gaze to meet his mother's eyes. Those eyes that had looked at him with such tenderness when he was a child sick with fever or when he was afraid of storms. His voice came out as a whisper laden with regret. "Mom, I just want to say I'm so sorry. We should never have kicked you out. We should never have forgotten everything you did for us. There isn't a day that I don't feel the weight of watching you leave that night." And every corner of that empty house reminds me that we lost it. Because we lost you. We lost it. Because we lost you. It took losing everything for them to finally see the truth. They're on their knees, completely broken. But is sorry enough to heal the wound they caused? Josephine's answer is coming right up. Josephine felt a single tear slide down her cheek, but her expression remained serene. She walked slowly until she was standing in front of them and bent down just enough so they could see her clearly. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice came out firm and warm at the same time. My children, I have already forgiven you. I forgave you a long time ago, because resentment only poisons the soul, and I don't want to carry that weight. But I also understood that my place is no longer where it was before. My life has taken another path, and now I have a reason to smile every morning. Stephen tried to take his mother's hand, but she gently withdrew it. It's not for a lack of love, she said, because I will always love you. But I learned to love myself, and here I have found the peace I was searching for so long. Kimberly broke into louder sobs, her fingers gripping the dirt. We just wanted you to come back, she murmured, for you to give us another chance to do it right. Adam bowed his head and covered his face with his hands, unable to hold her gaze. Walter stood to the side, watching respectfully. His firm presence was a reminder to everyone that Josephine was no longer alone, that there was someone willing to care for her with the love and dignity she always deserved. Josephine sighed and placed a hand on Stephen's shoulder, a gesture that was both comforting and final. Maybe someday we can meet again as a family. But now, it's time for each of you to find your own path. Mine is here, with this sea, with this garden, and with a heart that finally feels at peace. Her children looked at her through their tears, knowing deep down that they had lost much more than a house. They had lost the daily presence of the woman who was their strength and their refuge. And even though she forgave them, life doesn't always offer second chances. When they finally stood up and walked back to the car, their steps were heavy, their bodies bent by the weight of a regret that would stay with them long after the sound of the engine faded into the distance, leaving behind the constant murmur of the waves and the scent of the wisteria dancing in the wind, around the woman who had finally learned to live for herself. The faint light of dawn filtered through the white curtains of the small coastal house, while the murmur of the waves arrived as a constant whisper, like a lullaby enveloping every corner of that new home. At the wooden table near the window, Josephine sat with her hair gathered in a loose bun and a light blanket over her shoulders. Her fingers, agile but marked by the years, moved delicately over a white linen handkerchief, where letters were forming stitch by stitch, each colored thread intertwined with a precision that spoke not only of skill, but of love, a serene, deep love that had learned to blossom after the pain. With every movement of the needle, the words Joe and Walter took shape in the center of the handkerchief, surrounded by small embroidered flowers, reminiscent of the wisteria in her garden, the same garden she now watched, slowly awaken under the golden light bathing. The coast. Every so often, she would look up at Walter, who was watching the sea from the terrace with a hot cup of coffee in his hands, his silhouette cutting against the sky in shades of fire and lavender. There was a tranquility in him that one rarely sees in people, the calm of someone who has learned to love unconditionally and to wait without desperation. When she finished the last stitch, Josephine ran her fingertips over the letters, as if to make sure they were real, that his name next to hers was not a dream, but tangible evidence of a new stage in her life. Her lips curved into a soft, melancholic smile as she remembered the cold nights on a town square bench when she believed her story had ended, when she thought her children's abandonment was the final page of her existence. But now here she was, in a house bathed in sunlight, with the sound of the waves as her soundtrack, and a man who loved her by her side. She put the handkerchief in a small dresser drawer and stood up carefully. Her bare feet sank into the wooden floor, warm from the first rays of the Sunday. She walked out to the terrace, where Walter was waiting for her with one of those smiles that come from the soul, the kind that don't need words to convey what they feel. He held out a hand to her and said in a serene, deep voice, "Come, Joe, let's walk together before the sun gets too high and the world wakes up, because this moment is just for us." She took his hand without hesitation, feeling the firm, secure warmth that restored her strength. And together, They began to walk down the small path that led to the beach. The still cool sand felt soft under their bare feet, and each step left a print that was soon kissed by the sea foam in its constant ebb and flow. They walked in silence, hands intertwined, hearts beating in time, the salt air filling their lungs and the distant song of seabirds their only witness to their peace. Josephine took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and let the breeze caress her face, carrying away the last shadows of a past that no longer hurt so much. She opened her eyes and looked at Walter. His dark eyes reflected the golden light of the rising sun and the serenity of someone who has found their place in the world. In a soft voice, full of infinite tenderness, she said, "My children kicked me out in the night, but you arrived like the dawn, illuminating everything I thought was lost, giving me back my faith in love, in life, and in myself." Walter gently pulled her closer to his side and replied, "And you came to give meaning to my final years, teaching me that it's never too late to love, to start over, and to believe that happiness can find us even when we think all is lost." They continued walking until the sun began to rise on the horizon, tinting the sea in golden and orange hues that mixed with the deep blue of the water. The waves broke gently at their feet, and the gulls circled overhead, crying out their sharp calls to the wind. From above, an imaginary camera panned up, showing the tiny couple, hand in hand, on the vast expanse of sand and sea. Their footprints were left behind like a testament to a surpassed past, while soft, emotional music filled the air like a whisper of hope and redemption. Josephine closed her eyes for a moment and felt that, for the first time in a long time, her heart was light and whole, ready for each new dawn next to the man who gave her back her life. And so, a mother who was cast out into the night found a new dawn, and a love capable of healing even the deepest wounds. In the end, Josephine found peace with her true love, while her children paid the price for their betrayal. Do you believe in karma? If you were Josephine, could you forgive your children after all they did? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, as your opinion is very important to us. If this story touched your heart, please hit like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next meaningful story.